British television now.
Good evening and welcome to Jasim Azzawi show today, October 19th, 2025. And I'm delighted to welcome from London, Jeremy Corbyn, the former leader of the Labour Party and the current interim leader of your party in the United Kingdom. Mr. Corbyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on the show with you.
Thank you. I hope this is going to be the first of many, because I know you're in demand. I see you all over the place and everybody wants a part of you.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a very busy time. I'm doing a lot of meetings all over the UK. And last week I was in Malaysia with Anwar Ibrahim, the Prime Minister, at a conference they held on development, and obviously a great deal of the conference was discussing Palestine, recognition and support for the Palestinian people.
Speaking about the recognition,
great to be there.
Speaking about UK recognizing the state of Palestine, 2 years after the horrendous images that we saw, would you say it's rather late?
Well, it's very late. Many of us supported motions in the British Parliament more than 10 years ago, calling for the recognition of Palestine. It was a non-binding resolution, but it was carried by the House of Commons. And ever since then, we've been arguing for that recognition, particularly since October 23. And the government has stood against that and not agreed to it, then finally did give in, shall we say, at the very last minute, but gave a very conditional recognition of Palestine.
How do you explain this, rather very late and in a very timid way, and came with certain conditions, given the gravity of the situation, not to mention the historical background of Britain's involvement in Palestine?
Well, they basically have never given up on the very close security and foreign policy relationship with Israel. Britain continues to have a security cooperation with Israel, which means that the intelligence sharing of the overflying flights on Gaza is given to the IDF and to the Israeli government. And
not to mention the supply of arms.
Well, I'm just going to come on to that. The supply of arms has not ended, and the supply of components for the F-35 jets continues from Britain, in which 15% of those parts are made in Britain. So we have a huge problem in that Britain's economic ties to Israel are very, very close, and those ties are being maintained. And our argument is that since they said they were suspending the trade talks with Israel, then we should also be doing what other countries have done and suspending trade because of the acts of genocide that have been committed by Israel.
This dichotomy that you alluded to between what the people want, and I will mention the protest, we saw 500,000, perhaps over 1 million people protesting in Trafalgar Square and Oxford Street in Manchester, all the way to Scotland, and between what Keir Starmer's government are doing. How do you explain this split vision to a lot of people? Says, if this is democracy, if the government is listening to the people, then they would be listening to the mass protest. And not all of them young people, but from all walks of life, from all backgrounds.
The government is very out of touch on public opinion. There's been growing support for Palestine for a very long time, and I've been involved in Palestine campaigns in Britain for all of my life. And there's the greatest understanding and consciousness there's ever been. And after October 23, there was an even greater understanding. And when many of us called for a ceasefire in order to save life in Gaza, Keir Starmer, who was then leader of the opposition, refused to back that, and persuaded Labour MPs to behave in Parliament in a way that supported his view. That did Labour a lot of damage, and then we had the general election the following year in July 24, and that election showed that Labour lost a lot of support. It got less votes than I got as leader of the party in 2019, and a number of independents were elected to Parliament, including me and other colleagues who've now become the Independent Alliance. The demonstrations in support of Palestine have got bigger and bigger, and as you quite rightly point out, the biggest one before last weekend's was when we had close to 1 million people marching to the US Embassy when Priti Patel was Home Secretary, and she tried to have the march banned. That was unsuccessful. And then we had this huge demonstration last weekend, and that was after the ceasefire had been declared. The reason it was so big was, one, that people wanted to show their support for Palestine, but also they're very sceptical of the terms of the ceasefire and what it actually means, because Israel still occupies over half of the Gaza Strip, still retains access control through the Rafah crossing, and is still preventing, despite the agreement that they supported, the delivery of sufficient food and other aid to the people of Gaza. And so, whilst conditions have undoubtedly got better, in the sense the bombing is no longer happening, undoubtedly got better in the sense that some food is coming in. The reality is, for many Palestinian people, they're still living in a desperate situation with a lack of food, lack of water, and lack of support on their crucial medical needs.
You mentioned
So,
you mentioned the
yeah, go
word,
on.
you used the word Keir Starmer managed or succeeded in persuading members of parliament in order to support. What does that actually mean? You just bring them one-on-one discussions? Is it a threat? Is it the money? Is it the lobby? Is it the Israeli lobby behind all this? We are trying to understand what makes a government like the British government takes the position that it takes.
The British political system has many good points about it, but it also has some very bad points about it. And the bad points about it are that the parliamentary caucuses of the Labour Party and the others are not answerable to their own parties. They act almost alone. They are elected on a manifesto, and then after that, the Labour Party members and conference can say what they like, and the leadership can ignore it. And so the Labour conference, not very long ago, just at the end of September, voted that Israel had committed acts of genocide, supported a boycott, and all the other things that I would have voted for myself. And immediately was rejected by Keir Starmer, who said he didn't accept these decisions and they would carry on. And ever since he became leader, we've had this problem that he has continued his own attitude and policy towards Palestine and Israel, despite the enormous changes that are taking place outside. Labour support has gone down consistently ever since the low point of the general election of July 24. It's not all Palestine, but a very large amount of it is. People are just appalled and angered when they see on their television screens children dying from starvation, lack of medicines, and all the other absolutely vital things that they need. And then they find that their government is still supplying weapons, diplomatic and political support, and indeed, crucially, being one of the key suppliers of components for the planes that are used for the bombing of Gaza. And so it's this anger that's there. Now, the demonstrations are important, and they've actually changed opinion. The government did suspend some arms licenses only in response to the demonstrations that took place. And so we'll carry on demanding and demonstrating, but it's also what happens globally. I'm part of Progressive International, and we helped to found the Hague Group. The Hague Group, led by South Africa and Colombia, Malaysia, and so on, very effective, meets to support the UN's decisions, UN court decision, that is the International Court of Justice. And it's the global support for Palestine which increasingly has isolated European and North American countries. Interestingly, At the height of all this, they felt the need to recognize Palestine because of popular opinion in all their countries. The size of demonstrations in Spain, France, Britain, USA, and even in Germany. And so world opinion is absolutely moving very rapidly.
That recognition, Mr.
Starmer and
Corbyn,
others are just left behind. Sorry, go on.
that recognition was almost inevitable given what you said, and that is the global tsunami that has swept across the globe, perhaps except for certain countries like Germany and the United States. And the United Nations, passed several resolutions. One of them is calling what happened in Gaza as a genocide. In a split vision, when you look at what Keir Starmer calls it, he calls it self-defense. And very belatedly, he came to the fact that he needs to recognize, but he never, ever uttered the word genocide like the rest of the world do.
In fact, he disagreed very strongly when my colleagues and I in the Independent Alliance group of MPs used the word genocide in questions to him. And he, at one point, said, I'm a lawyer, I know what genocide is, and this isn't. No, it is genocide. That has been a discussion, very detailed discussion by the International Court of Justice and many other scholars. And when we held our Gaza Independent Tribunal in September in Church House, Westminster, just adjacent to Parliament, we had a great deal of legal opinion saying quite clearly this is a genocide. A genocide is when a power, in this case Israel, specifically targets a group of people, i.e. Palestinians, or in many cases Palestinian children. That then amounts to genocide against that group. And Starmer seems to have great difficulty uttering the word genocide in the context of Israel. And despite being forced into recognizing Palestine, he now seems to be very keen on Britain being involved in the reconstruction of Gaza and has invited Tony Blair to join the whole team, which I think is absurd and fundamentally wrong. Tony Blair was the one who led Britain into the war in Iraq, and I think he's absolutely the last person that should have anything to do with the reconstruction of Gaza.
We shall
don't need
come.
another colonial settlement. We need a
We shall
recognition of
come.
the
We shall
Palestinian
come to
people.
Tony Blair, and I will talk about him at length. But what is interesting to me, what I'm trying to find out, is the word why. What makes Keir Starmer beholden to this position? Is it the donor class? Is it the Zionist lobby? Many people, Mr. Corbyn, they don't know that Zionism, as a matter of fact, started in England almost 200 years ago, way before Herzl and way before the Basel meetings. And it was the Christian evangelical, they came up to this idea, and then somehow it crossed the border, it crossed the big pond and went to the United States. My question remains is the reason for this reluctance to admit, to recognize that 80 years of misery is enough.
I think too many people conflate Zionism with Judaism. They are completely different things. Judaism is what you and I would absolutely agree on: complete respect for everyone's faith and their belief and their right to practice their faith and practice their belief. And if you deny that, then that leads you straight into anti-Semitism. I absolutely support the right of Jewish people to practice their faith and their religion everywhere in the world, absolutely everywhere. Zionism is a different construct altogether. Zionism, as you pointed out, was actually developed more in the United States than anywhere else, and then came over to Europe at the early part of the 20th century. And that was the force that persuaded the British government to issue the Balfour Declaration in 1917. Interestingly, that declaration was opposed by the two Jewish members of the cabinet at that time. And when they were asked why they opposed it, their reason was that they thought it would make anti-Semitism worse in society rather than better, because they came from a community that was suffering horrible racist abuse in Britain, in France, in Germany, Poland and elsewhere, victims of the pogroms in Russia. And so Starmer seems to me to have a rather confused view of history where the two things become conflated together. And so he pushed for the IHRA declaration definitions to be put forward. I argued very strongly that we must have a position on racism that is abhorrent to every single form of racism, obviously including anti-Semitism, but it should never prevent people making wholly legitimate criticisms of the government of Israel, or indeed any other government for that matter, without crossing a border into anti-Semitism. And that absolutely is my position. And so I am opposed to Zionism. I do understand the power of Zionism within the Israeli government, and it should never be confused with the rights of Jewish people to be defended and be supported in their right to practice their faith and practice their religion.
I would like to add just one thing before we open the Tony Blair file, and that is, you said about the Jews, they are opposed to this. As a matter of fact, a great segment of the protestation that whether we saw in the United States or abroad or in the United Kingdom, it just says not in our names. We are opposed to it. And people, like you said, they conflate Zionism with Judaism, and it's absolutely not. And the horrible thing is the ignorant people, they term and they name the Muslims and the Arabs, they are anti-Semite. There is one piece of explanation that I would like to put out there, and that is,
I think if I could just say something there, I think that's a very important point you've made. And take it back a short while, when the former Home Secretary, Priti Patel, was trying to ban our Palestine demonstration, she described it as a march of hate against the Jewish people. There was a very large number of Jewish people on that march in the Jewish bloc. There are very large numbers of Jewish people in Britain, USA, all over Europe, who absolutely abhor what Israel is doing in Gaza and the West Bank and their denial of rights of Palestinian refugees. And so the idea that somehow or other every Jewish person supports Netanyahu and Israel is simply nonsense and completely wrong. There are all the demonstrations and all the meetings I've been at everywhere around the world have had large numbers of Jewish people. Indeed, I was in South Africa last month, mainly on Palestinian issues. Very interesting, talking to older members of the Jewish community in South Africa, many of whom had actually been the political mainstay of the African National Congress. They haven't changed their views at all, and they absolutely supported South Africa's application to the International Court of Justice to declare Israel's actions an act of genocide. And so let's remember that there are many Jewish people all over the world, hundreds of thousands, millions, who absolutely appalled at what's happening to the Palestinian people. And so it's very important that we make this very, very clear. Ours is a humanitarian demand that genocide stops and the Palestinian people are allowed to live.
Before we mentioned Tony Blair again one more time, perhaps in some details, I just want to add something in light of what you just said. In this part of the world, the majority, pretty much, they are Arabs and Muslims. We as Muslims, we will not be considered Muslims. Actually, we will be considered hated people if we don't believe in all the prophets of Judaism, starting from Jacob, Israel, to Moses, to Isaiah, to Zechariah, to Jesus Christ. So it is very easy sometimes to say the Arabs, they are anti-Semite. We cannot, by law as well as by religion, we cannot be anti-Semite. But let's open this peace plan and the international stabilization force that is being put together by the Americans. What do you think of it? Will it achieve anything? Especially the ceasefire has already been broken so many times. A lot of people have died since.
My initial reaction to Donald Trump and others meeting without any Palestinians in the room to decide what the future of Gaza should be and the form that future governance of Gaza should be. And then that's when Tony Blair's name came into it. I just thought this is, at one level, absurd, but another level, just completely wrong. This is back to the idea of the British Mandate in 1921-22. This is back to the idea that there should be a European governor sent in to run Gaza on the basis that Palestinian people are not able to run Gaza in the way that they should. And so it is a colonial construct in the very beginning, with huge amounts of money at stake to take over land and all that goes with it. Now, this is an important point. The group Forensic Architects demonstrated at our tribunal that the bombing patterns of what Israel were doing was actually in line with the overall plans that they were trying to develop for the Gaza Riviera. They clearly have a plan there to develop some kind of hotels, resorts, and goodness knows what, and force the Palestinian people out of Gaza, a sort of second Nakba. I do not believe that has completely left the agenda. And I do think the primary issue has to be the right of the Palestinian people to be able to govern their own area and decide what the future of it is. What to me is interesting is that even through all the bombardment, we were on a call the other day with Gaza architects. Local government structures in Gaza have, to some extent, survived, in the sense that the elected mayors, the local elected mayors, are running things, are helping with the clear up and the clean up, are helping to restore water supplies and all that. They are the best educated population in the world, highest number of graduates per head of the population of any country in the world. They don't need Tony Blair or anybody else to go in there and tell them how to do it. What they need is an end to the bombardment and sufficient finance to pay for the reconstruction. So Gaza can once again be a place of safety and a place of agriculture, as well as all the other industries.
When people in this part of the world heard the name Tony Blair is going to be at the top of that pyramid, they remember, needless to say, 2003. But more importantly, they were surprised that several years later, he never apologized like perhaps George Bush did for the invasion of Iraq. And more importantly, he was knighted. He was knighted by the late Queen. And people didn't understand a person like that, and I've heard it from so many people, he should be hanged from the highest pole in Trafalgar Square. And here you are, he's coming back again to life. For several years, he was the head of the quartet, making a lot of money, and now his son is also slated to play a major role, and yet his name comes back again. Who's behind pushing Tony Blair to the forefront?
Tony Blair also insisted, when he stepped down as Prime Minister, on continuing to be the so-called peace envoy for the quartet in the Middle East.
That was an appointment by George Bush.
A George Bush appointment. Now, he had supported George Bush and worked with George Bush on the invasion of Iraq. As you know, when I was leader of the Labour Party and of the opposition in the British Parliament, I promised I would, and I did, give an apology on behalf of the Labour Party for the Iraq War to an audience made up mainly of military families. These are families that had lost soldiers in Iraq, and I made that apology. During the period running up to that, we were getting ready for the Chilcot inquiry to be published. The Chilcot inquiry was devastating in its conclusions about the way government had operated, the way Blair had operated, the way in which legal advice had been routinely ignored, and we still went ahead with the war. So Blair himself decided to go to war. Blair himself pushed the decisions. Blair himself knows full well those lives that were lost in Iraq were a consequence of the nonsense that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction and had to militarily be destroyed. He knew then, he knows now, and he will know for the rest of his life There never were any weapons of mass destruction. The whole thing was built on an enormous lie. And he's then tried to reconstruct himself, and has made a great deal of money running the Tony Blair Foundation and other related operations, all of which are based on big finance and big businesses around the world. But he seems to have some kind of almost obsession with being proved right about Iraq and about the Middle East. He's been proved wrong on every conceivable occasion. He should not be anywhere near it, anywhere near anything to do with Gaza reconstruction. And indeed, none of those countries that have armed and aided Israel should be allowed anywhere near it either. They have all got blood on their hands by a continued supply of weapons to Israel, knowing full well what those weapons are going to be used for.
Mr. Corbyn, you're not only a politician, you're not only a human rights advocate, but you're also a historian. You write quite a bit, and you know exactly how history and history's judgment goes on. Now, after 80 years of misery inflicted on the Palestinians for that famous promise, the Balfour Declaration, has the time come for the UK, for Britain to say, we are absolutely sorry and we have to make amends, we have to do something? Isn't it time now for Britain to recognize the injustice that inflicted on Palestine and, you know, appending this entire region in continuous wars?
You're right. The British role in all this has been one as a colonial master that was imposed on the people of the area during the mandate. But remember, and I'm sure you're very well aware of this, that 2 years or a year before the Balfour Declaration was the secret Sykes-Picot Agreement between Britain and France. And that was kept secret for a very long time and only revealed when
the Bolsheviks
Soviet was established.
Yeah,
and
the
they
Bolsheviks
found
came
the
to power.
documents
Yeah.
in the Royal Archives in Moscow, and then revealed them to the rest of the world. And we then found out what had been going on even at the height of the First World War. So Britain always had this view. They wanted to control that part of the Middle East, and France could control Syria and Lebanon, and that's the way they divided things up. And Britain had Palestine and had an influence over Jordan, and already had a big influence over Egypt. So the whole thing was a colonial construct. Yes, Britain needs to do a bit more than just apologize for what it did and the damage it caused and the lives that were lost, but also the consistent supply of weapons and security information to Israel, rather than recognizing the plight of the Palestinian people. Now, I know the world has woken up to the cause of Palestine since October 23, but the reality is that the occupation has never really gone away. Ever since the 67 war, if not before that, there's been a regular presence of Israeli forces all over the West Bank.
More importantly, Mr. Corbyn, the occupation is increasing. You know, Israel in the last 20 years has taken more land in Lebanon, in Syria. Now they're talking about a greater Israel, including part of perhaps even Saudi Arabia. Now, I mentioned that you're a student of history, and if anybody needs to know about how history moves, they should read the magnum opus of Edward Gibbon, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire and What Happens to Empires. This construct, which is about 80 years old, called Israel, as a historian and as a politician, how do you see it unfolding in this huge sea of Muslims and Arabs in the area? Can it last?
What I see happening is a very intense political debate going on in Israel, which we don't necessarily hear as much about as we should, partly because Israel isn't very keen on the reality of the views of a lot of people in Israel being heard. I'm in touch with Palestinians living in Israel, as well as members of the Knesset of the how should I put it, anti-government bloc, and they all recognise that they have to live with the people of the region. The idea that you carry on with this ultra separatism is unsustainable. It means you just have a security state heavily armed by the United States and being a threat to all its neighbors. Now, the idea of the Greater Israel thing has always been there, but it's got more intense. And Netanyahu and the Knesset have actually endorsed the annexation of the West Bank, albeit on a non-binding motion. But nevertheless, the Knesset did pass that motion. They, as you quite rightly pointed out, are also expanding into Syria and to Lebanon through the extension of the Golan Heights illegal grab that was made in the Six-Day War in 1967. And they also have designs on other places as well. Well, is not George Bush now, Donald Trump now, going to actually endorse that? Or is he going to say to Israel, look, this is ridiculous, it's impossible, you cannot do it, and we will not provide the weapons to do it? I don't know if Trump has made up his mind what he intends to do on this. He seems to me to be playing a very interesting
he was asked that question,
double
Mr.
Corbyn.
He
He's
was
a double
asked,
act, really.
He was asked that question when on his way back to the United States on the plane, whether he's going to recognize this two-state solution. And in his normal way, he said, I might do it, I might not, I don't know, I have to decide. So it's kind of equivocating all the time. And since we are talking about Donald Trump, what did you make of his Knesset speech, and what did you make of the, Photoshop or photo opportunity of Sharm el-Sheikh?
Well, I didn't hear all of the Knesset speech, but I heard some snippets of it on television. I find it odd that Trump clearly had a big hand in trying to get a deal to bring about a ceasefire. There was no question about that. And the ceasefire of a sort came in, although, as you said at the beginning of the program, and I've just got more messages today, it is already being routinely violated by Israel. One would have thought that the conclusion of all this for Trump would have been, we want to create peace across the whole region. And that means there's got to be significant political changes in Israel, its relationship and approach to the Palestinian people. And then, not a bit of it. He goes straight off on a plane to Tel Aviv, makes a speech there in total support of everything Israel has said, has done, is doing, and the right under Netanyahu intend to do. And so the contradictions are there, writ large and huge, on the world stage. Obviously, I hope the ceasefire lasts, but a ceasefire is no more than that. It is not a long-term settlement. It is not a recognition of the rights of Palestinian people. It is not a demand that Israel completely withdraw from Gaza and the West Bank. And whilst the concentration has understandably been on the plight of the Palestinians in Gaza, a lot of people are not aware that over 1,000 Palestinians have been killed on the West Bank since October 23 by Israeli military actions, by bombardments, and others have been killed by the settlers who've been burning villages and expanding their settlements because the world's media were understandably concentrating on Gaza. And so until there is a complete withdrawal, I don't think the Palestinian people are going to be able to say they're living in any kind of peace at all.
Jeremy Corbyn, leader of the Your Party and the former leader of the Labour Party, thank you very much for being a guest on Jasim Azzawi Show.
My pleasure, and thank you very much for inviting me onto your program.
It is my deep pleasure, and I hope to have you soon again.
I'm happy to come back whenever you invite me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have reached the end of this show, and just before I close the show, a brief reminder that in 20 minutes I'm going to have Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, who was the Chief of Staff of the late U.S. Secretary of State, Colin Powell. Until then, bye-bye.